Hello, hello. Welcome to PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series. My name is Caitlin Rose Seiler, and I am the Stewardship Coordinator with Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan, or SKPCAP. Today, Nick Carter will be speaking about the recovery of trumpeter swans in Alberta. Before we begin, I'd like to state that we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, past and present. For millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I'd like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. And just a few items before we get going. I'd like to note that PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series is a monthly presentation about anything to do with prairie conservation or species at risk. Uh, I'd like to invite everyone to join us on April 30th for a webinar about scale-dependent relationships between habitat, insects, and birds in native grasslands, jointly presented by the Canadian Wildlife Federation, SODCAP, and Birds Canada. On May 23rd, Annabelle Dombrow, a recent graduate from the University of Alberta, will be speaking about the management of annual brome invasion within northern mixed grasslands using indazaphylam. A reminder to all of our listeners out there, you'll be muted for the duration of the webinar, but if you have any questions, just type it into the Q&A section of the webinar dashboard at any time during the presentation, and we'll be answering questions towards the end of the webinar. And if you have the same question, feel free to upvote other people's question. I'd like to take a moment to note that financial support for today's webinar is provided by our presenting sponsors, North American Helium and Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association, and in-kind support is provided by Nature Alberta. And I'm pleased to be able to present today's speaker. Nick Carter is a science and nature writer, a photographer, and educator from Edmonton, Alberta. And as a lifelong naturalist, his professional experience and personal interests range from birdwatching and butterflies to dinosaur paleontology and just about anything to do with the natural world. So I'll pass it over to Nick.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for being here. Let me just get my presentation shared. So hopefully everybody can see that. If you can, say nothing. If you can't, say something. I'll take your silence as a good thing. So this is like it says here, presentation on the recovery of trumpeter swans in Alberta. So this is going to be sort of a summary of work that other people have done, mostly provincial biologists and things like that, as well as just concerned citizen scientists throughout the last 120 years or so in Alberta. So without further ado, this is the trumpeter swan. So this species is our largest North American waterfowl. They get up to about 1.5 meters long, about 11 kilograms in weight. It is a bird that's pretty easy to recognize. So the adults are usually like a pure white. This one on the right you can see here looks a little bit rust stained, and that's generally from hanging out all season in shallow, mucky wetlands. The face and the bill area, as well as the legs and feet, are black. You can recognize the juveniles, and there's a juvenile one on the lower right here. They're kind of like a pale gray, and they've got kind of a pink blotch near the center of the bill. And then the babies, which in swans are called cygnets, are just these fuzzy little gray things. The call is, well, if you ever get to hear it, you can see why they're called trumpeter swans, because it sounds a lot like kind of a trumpet or a French horn, that kind of thing. It's very musical. Habitat for this species kind of varies depending on the time of the year. Out here in the prairie provinces, we're going to see them generally during their migration period and their nesting period. While they're on the move, while they're migrating, you'll often see them either on open agricultural fields, as well as big open lakes and rivers. And then when they sort of break off to nest and to breed, they like to do that on shallow, quiet, sort of reedy smaller lakes, wetlands, things like that. And the nest is generally going to be on the very edge of the shore, or sometimes it's on top of a beaver or muskrat den. They like beaver lodges, that sort of thing. So here's a picture of a couple of adult swans. So they will generally actually mate for life, and both the parents will take care of the babies. And you can see the little baby cygnets there. They're pretty cute. Um, this is kind of a typical clutch size. There's one, two, three, four, five. So this is actually about as big as a clutch size as they'll generally tend to have. It's anywhere from about 4 to 6 babies. If they're lucky, all of them will make it through their first season, where they then, will molt into their juvenile plumage and be able to fly. But some of them may get taken by predators. And this is kind of your typical swan nesting area. You can see they're like really reedy, quiet, undisturbed wetlands, places like that where they can feel kind of safe and secure. And here's kind of a typical scene of swans getting ready to migrate. So during the breeding season, they'll break off into individual pairs, each on their own water body, and then they rejoin as these big flocks together, mixed with juveniles and adults. And they'll stop to feed on fields and meadows, as well as lakes and things like that. And you can see there's all these sort of ducks and coots and things around them. And they have this interesting kind of relationship with smaller waterfowl. What trumpeter swans feed on is, while they're up in our area anyway, it tends to be aquatic tubers and things like that, water plants. And if they can't reach them by dunking their neck into the water to reach to the bottom, or if it's too hard to sort of just pull it with their beak, what they'll do is they'll kind of pump the water with their legs to sort of stir up the sediment at the bottom and dislodge the roots and things like that of the plants at the bottom of the water, and then everything just kind of floats to the surface. And ducks and things like that will follow the swans around and kind of nibble at the stuff that they've stirred up from the bottom. So there are a few species that you might mistake for trumpeter swans, but they're generally not too hard to identify. On the left here, we've got a trumpeter swan, and then on the right, we've got a tundra swan. And this is kind of your best candidate for mixing something up with a trumpeter. It can be kind of tricky if you just see them from a distance. I often have to hope to hear their calls or get a closer look at them if I'm just seeing them from far away. But there are some clues. The trumpeter swan is generally going to be larger. So if you see them together, and they will sometimes actually flock together during the migration season. So yeah, that always double check your flocks of swans. The trumpeter is going to be larger. The laurel area, which is just this area right in front of the eye, kind of at the base of the upper part of the bill, is always going to be black. In tundra swans, there's often, but not always, a yellow patch. This individual that I photographed just outside of Edmonton has kind of a larger yellow patch there, and some that's just like a little teardrop shape, and some don't have one at all. So that can make things kind of tricky. The call of the trumpeter is a very, like I said earlier, musical horn-like thing. It's much more higher pitched in the tundra swan. Also, where the feathers kind of form the top border of the bill, it's sort of U-shaped in tundra swans, whereas in the trumpeter, it's sort of V-shaped. So if you get to look at them head on, you can tell from there. Up close, you probably wouldn't mistake a trumpeter swan for a snow goose, but mistaken identity has been made before, especially when these things are, flying around in their big flocks. Now, of course, the trumpeter swan is going to be a fair bit larger than the snow goose, and it's going to have a much larger neck. Um, the snow goose, you can't really see in this photo, but they've got kind of a pinkish bill, and then on the side of the bill is a dark patch that we call a grin patch. And then the snow goose is going to always have these black wing tips. You're never going to see that in the trumpeter swan. If you do, you have a very unusual swan on your hands. The snow goose also comes in you might be able to see a few examples of individuals here. It's called the blue phase, and it's just like a dark, kind of bluish gray color that affects some members of snow geese. Trumpeter swans aren't going to do that. Adults always have white feathers. Like we said, the juveniles are gray, but still they're going to be bigger than snow geese. And snow geese have a very high pitched kind of nasally honking sound to their call. So you can tell them that way. Now, in North America, there are sort of three major populations of trumpeter swans. There's the Pacific Coast population, which obviously ranges from Alaska down through Western British Columbia, Rocky Mountain population, which is going to be essentially from around the Rocky Mountains east to just about into Saskatchewan, which then from there spreads out to the Great Lakes area, and that's going to be your interior population. And these different populations are kind of differentiated by the fact that their migration patterns are a bit different. They're going to be going to and from different locations. So the Pacific ones are going to be going down to mostly the coast, spending the winter kind of on or near the ocean. Our Rocky Mountain populations, especially in Alberta, they're mostly going down to this kind of area where Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana meet, which isn't all that far. They're kind of a medium distance migrator. Um, but what they're doing down in the States here is there's all these sort of smaller, sort of microclimate habitats where they will have open water for the year and they'll just kind of hang out there. During the breeding season, they're mostly hanging out in open plains and parkland, some boreal forest areas. It's also not uncommon, though, especially during warmer winters or in places where there is open water persisting, that some may overwinter in their breeding range. So, for example, around the Edmonton area, especially a little bit west of Edmonton, there are ponds and lakes that don't always freeze during the winter, often because of power plant water that's sort of warming up the lakes and things like that, prevents them from freezing. And so swans will sometimes overwinter in these places. It's not always the most comfortable kind of winter, I'm sure, but in their mind, it might beat, making the migration trip. So focusing on Alberta, there are some major sort of core breeding regions. You can find trumpeter swans outside of these regions during migration, but during sort of the late spring through the summer breeding season where they're staying mostly in one place and raising their young. These are the general areas that you're going to get. So kind of the central parkland area encompassing the Edmonton area, and then a little ways east and south of that down through the Red Deer area. There's a small population down in the southwest corner around Pincher Creek. And then way up in northwestern Alberta into northeastern British Columbia, this huge area here is really great with trumpeter swans too. And we'll talk about how each area is doing today and where you can find swans more sort of specifically. So, the trumpeter swan hasn't always been doing too well. It's kind of the avian equivalent of how we think of things like bison and beavers. So, before the fur trade made it, especially out west in North America, trumpeter swan's pretty abundant. We can say with some, certainty that throughout a lot of Alberta, if not most of Alberta, they would have been pretty darn common. Then, as the fur traders are moving west, they're not just targeting things like beavers and muskrats and things, but also trumpeter swans, partly for their meat, but mostly for their feathers. So their wing feathers are used as writing quills. The contour and downy feathers are used as powder puffs, things to put whatever kind of makeup they were using on at the time on their face. And then just as fashion accessories. So they'd basically make like pelts out of them and use them as, something to drape around your neck maybe, or put some of the feathers in your hat, things like that. Obviously, that's fallen out of fashion today, but that was a big thing at the time. Overhunting of things like beavers and muskrats also really didn't help. Less beavers around during that time means, less beavers building and maintaining their lodges. So there's less places for swans to make their nests. And then into the late 19th, early 20th century, you're getting lakeside recreation communities built around wetlands, and you've got wetlands being drained for farming and grazing area. So that's happening throughout a lot of Alberta. You also have a lack of good habitat and winter forage in the places where they're spending the winter. So by that, because of that, the swan population just plummeted, and they were thought to be kind of on the verge of extinction. By the early 1900s, we're looking at no more than 100 individuals estimated for the province. I've also seen sources that said at one time they were thought to be completely absent from Alberta. Um, Either way, they weren't doing very good. But then luckily we had a small population discovered near the city of Grand Prairie, Alberta. So this is up in northwestern Alberta. This is the county of Grand Prairie. Town is right about here. And so yeah, the locals discover swans still clinging to life in this section of the northwestern part of the province, and they decide, okay, so we've got this remnant of trumpeter swans left. We got to do something about this. Um, and a lot of good things happen. So 1917, we have the Migratory Bird Convention Act makes hunting of trumpeter swans as well as a bunch of other species illegal in Canada. The USA follows suit in 1918. So wherever you go in North America, you can't be hunting trumpeter swans. In 1932, Alberta starts founding all of these provincial parks, and one of the first is just west of Grand Prairie, right in this tiny little spot right here. So it's not a very big provincial park, but this is a beloved place in the area, Saskatoon Island Provincial Park. And it's founded in part because this is, and the lake that it's adjacent to, Lake Saskatoon, is a place where trumpeter swans are breeding. So they want to keep it safe as the farmland and industry is becoming more and more of a presence in the area. 1948, you've got Saskatoon Lake being designated as a migratory bird sanctuary. So all the more protection, which is very good. So by 1944, people in the Grand Prairie area are doing swan counts, and they've they count 64 adults and 14 cygnets located near the town. Which it's something. They're starting to increase. Um, but that was probably actually an underestimate, because it was basically just, folks who lived in the area going out whenever they had the time to do it. By a decade later, they found in total 232 individuals. So that's probably a big reason is a better count accuracies, but also they're just starting to do better. Um, and so the surveys in northwestern Alberta keep going, and they indicate that the population's getting better and better. And by the 70s, in the region, we're seeing really exponential swan growth, which is really good. Throughout the rest of Alberta, we're seeing these little scattered but fairly stable populations being established and popping up. And I kind of wanted to just give a little shout out to the what's now the city of Grand Prairie. I spent 5 years living there, working in paleontology of all things. But it's where I sort of first started paying attention to trumpeter swans. And the city and the county, as you can see, to this very day, they love their swans, and you can't spend much time in the Grand Prairie area without seeing swans branded all over the place. So yeah, it's a good thing. Um, in 1953, swan counts become like a regular thing in the Grand Prairie area, and by the 80s, that extends all across Alberta. So gets taken more and more seriously as we go. Um, Late 80s, breeding pairs are translocated from northwestern Alberta to Elk Island National Park, which is just a little ways east of Edmonton. You can see on this sign here a couple little swans. And the hope with that is to establish breeding population in what's called the Beaver Hills biosphere, just a little bit east of Edmonton in east central Alberta. What the Beaver Hill biosphere is essentially it's kind of like an upland area of boreal forest in the Aspen Parkland section of central Alberta. And it's really full of these little what are called prairie potholes. So just little shallow wetlands all over the place, which, would in theory make really great swan habitat. So, kind of looking towards the late 20th century, provincial government is doing 5-year swan counts. 1995, we find 792 individuals in Alberta. About 67% of them are in the Grand Prairie Valley View area. So we're still seeing northwestern Alberta kind of dominating the swan counts, but they're doing good up there. The species in 1997 goes from being classified as endangered to threatened. So there's some progress there. And then in 2000, we've got the first report on the status of trumpeter swans in Alberta published by the provincial government. And we're seeing just more and more population growth, which is really good. By that point, the species is, by 2013, the species is classified as at risk. So that doesn't sound great, but it's better than threatened, which is better than endangered. So, 2005 to 2010, this is the first of a 5-year recovery plan put out by the government of Alberta. So while trumpeter swan recovery had been previous to this kind of like a localized grassroots kind of thing, we're seeing at a provincial level now official swan conservation efforts, and then this was updated in 2012 through 2017. So, what I was interested in was, has this been successful? Um, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that, and like sort of scattered data to suggest that swans are getting better and better in Alberta, especially in particular areas. But how successful has the recovery plan been in the province? The Trumpeter Swan is often kind of looked at as a success story, but what I kind of wanted to do with this is dig a little deeper into their recovery plan and basically just see if it was doing as good as the hype made it out to be. So these recovery plans lay out the results of previous swan protection and conservation efforts, as well as future plans and continuing threats to the species. And they laid out these goals. Probably the most important would be preventing loss of critical breeding and staging habitat for swans. And what staging habitat is basically places where migratory species like swans are stopping to rest and feed on their way to wherever it is they're going. So this would be like, those fields and lakes we talked about earlier. These are staging areas. Um, and this is a really collaborative thing between the provincial government as well as industry in Alberta. This is, farming, oil and gas, forestry to a degree, as well as just private landowners. So cooperation with all of these major players there. Um, Another important goal is public education and outreach. So just getting people aware, both on a big scale, like an industrial scale, but also just on like an individual scale, how the swan's doing, what continuing threats there are, and how can just regular folks like us continue to help them. Um, Also, at the time, looked at improved research and monitoring of swans, conservation partnerships, and then subsequent assessments. So, how did all this go? Uh, Short answer is it's gone pretty good. There was a significant population increase between 1995 and 2010. During the 2010 population survey, they found 2,821 individuals, which is really great. The Grand Prairie Valley View area was home to 61% of the counted population, which is a slightly less population or a slightly less percentage than earlier counts. So basically, what that means, not to a huge degree, but what it's meaning is we're finding more swans breeding in more locations throughout the province, which is really great. 54 individuals were counted in the Beaver Hills area in 2010, which was up from 11 in 1995. So that's a good thing as well. And this is just a graph that I generated from uh, uh, provincial government data. So you can see we're just getting massive growth after massive growth, both of breeding, but also just individual swans. We're counting more and more each year. And so while the breeding success is going up moderately, we're seeing like more and more swans each year. And that might be because we're getting better at counting them, but it also could indicate that swans in Alberta are making more babies, essentially. They're losing less young, and they're just doing better all around, which is really good. In 2015, and this is data that, from what I could find, was not published. I actually spoke to Mark Heckbert, who is the sort of person in Alberta who's head of Trumpeter Swan recovery. He told me that they counted 7,734 individuals throughout the province, which is really skyrocketing number from the 5-year count before then. So that's doing pretty good. Um, and it's worth noting that actually the 5-year provincial counts stopped after this time. There was no count in 2020. And a big reason for that is they just weren't really worried about them enough to go through the effort of doing it. Um, they're not quite worried about them enough to be counting every individual swan in the province, which is a good thing. Means that they're doing well enough that we don't need to be continually monitoring them. But they're still worth keeping an eye on. There's easier ways that we can go about that now instead of physically going out into the field and counting every single swan in every region where they're likely to be breeding. Things like electronic databases like eBird and iNaturalist are useful tools for that. So, what is to thank for swans recovering as well as they have? Well, continued banning of hunting, breeding habitat population or protection has been a major thing. What we're also seeing, which is really great, is improvement of their wintering habitat, protection of places where swans are wintering in the States, as well as just them getting more better winter diet means that swans are returning to Alberta healthier and they are doing better at laying eggs and raising young. So the species was actually recategorized as sensitive in Alberta. So that's a continual improvement. Um, Now that doesn't mean that we're completely out of the woods, though. Trumpeter Swan is sensitive but not completely secure in Alberta, and there's things that could still be done better. Not to say that the um, conservation efforts haven't been successful, because they've been very successful. This Trumpeter Swan is really sort of upheld as a big success story for species conservation in the province, which is really great. And it kind of gives us hope for things that we're really concerned about today. Um, Two of our more our big concern bird species, at least in the province, include the sage grouse and the burrowing owl, which are now sort of the symbols of endangered birds in the province. So here's hoping that they can also be saved as efficiently as the trumpeter swan has. Now, as for areas where things could be going a little bit better, but aren't necessarily the end of the world, we've had um, really, really great, obviously, growth trends in northwestern Alberta, but this hasn't been seen to the same degree as elsewhere in the province. Down in the southwestern corner, the Waterton Pincher Creek population is stable. It's not getting worse, but it's not really getting any better. And a big reason for that is that's kind of like a very small geographic area. So it can only support so many swans. Now we have seen something of a decline in northeastern Alberta. So for example, in the Lac La Biche area, there was 9 individuals counted in the year 2000. They didn't find any, whoops, in 2012. And why is that? We're not terribly sure completely. Would they have been present there sort of pre fur trade? It seems likely. Um, One idea is the lakes in northeastern Alberta might just be too cold and deep compared to what you're seeing in places like the Central Parkland and the Peace River Parkland um, subregions, where they're doing really good, which have all these really shallow, warm, relatively warm, kind of muddy, marshy places that swans really like to breed in. So they're either just not having success in northeastern Alberta, maybe they're just sort of, avoiding the area now because they haven't had great breeding success there. They just find it's uncomfortable. Um, who knows for sure? Presumably the swans know, but they're not telling us. Increases in the Beaver Hills biosphere just east of Edmonton has gone slower than expected. While we are counting swans there was a goal of um, establishing 10 breeding pairs in the Beaver Hills, which would consistently come back to the region and show really good site fidelity. That hasn't materialized yet, and we aren't sure why. Theoretically, it should work. There's lots of shallow, marshy, weedy wetlands for them in this region. The area has tons of conservation areas. It runs the whole area from Elk Island National Park down through the provincially protected Cooking Hill or Cooking Lake area. Um, so what's going on there? We still need some more research as to why we haven't seen a population explosion there yet, like we've seen in northwestern Alberta. So, kind of in summary, for how they're doing geographically up in the Northwest, they're doing great. They're expanding like wild. Swans are doing gangbusters up there. Um, what you can kind of imagine is here in kind of north central Alberta is Lesser Slave Lake. If you kind of draw like an imaginary line right sort of north of Lesser Slave Lake, west of that line, swans are doing great. East of that line, up in the northeast here, they're not doing so good. They're either declining or in some places they're just absent altogether. Um, which is unfortunate. Maybe we'll see some population increases there in the coming years. Um, Central parts of Alberta, the Central Parkland area, and down in the Pincher Creek Waterton area, they're doing pretty good. They're relatively stable. We probably could stand to see more population increases in the Central Alberta area, Edmonton Red Deer corridor. And I suspect if things keep going the way they are, they will. But it's hard to say for absolute certain. Are we worried about them in this particular area? Not really. And then, like I said, down in the Waterton Pincher Creek area, they're doing good. They can only do so well down there. So that's that. So where to from here? So the Trumpeter Swan recovery in Alberta has overall been a very great success. We don't really need to be kind of wringing our hands over them and worrying about them as a population in the province all that much. But that doesn't mean that we should let our guard down at the same time. The species is still sensitive to human-caused disturbances in Alberta, and it probably always will be. They really tend to do best when we aren't, present at least in big numbers and messing with them. So this is kind of more for just sort of average everyday folks like us who aren't in charge of big corporations or things like that have an impact on swan habitat. Just how can we as private individuals help the trumpeter swan or at least not make their lives any harder? One of the best things you can do is just be a good neighbor to swans if you live anywhere where they might be either in migration or in their breeding season. It's important to give swans their space. So they're very sensitive to our presence, our noise, things like that. If you're power boating out near trumpeter swan nesting, it's not a good thing for them. Low impact activities like canoeing and kayaking, hiking on, established trails. So, not mucking your way through the wetland and, approaching swan nests, things like that are going to be good for them. obviously littering and polluting wetlands is going to be bad for them as well. And just kind of don't be a jerk. This is a news report that was put out in Grand Prairie several years ago now. There's this lake called Crystal Lake, which swans have been breeding at pretty consistently for years. When I lived there, I went to go watch them all the time. I think most of my at least half of my trumpeter swan photos in this presentation are taken at Crystal Lake. And it's an interesting place. It's surrounded by suburbs, and there's a park on one side, but the swans do good there. Most of the people in the area, they know they're there. They like to have them there. They're, respectful of the swans. But one year, some guy just started shooting off fireworks at them. And a lot of people, myself included, were just outraged at this. Why would anybody do this to any animal, especially something as um, unobtrusive and inoffensive to people as a trumpeter swan? I have no idea. Um, yeah, don't be like that. More great things you can do. Support causes dedicated to the protection of wetlands and staging areas. Basically, if we can, um, keeping the trumpeter swan means keeping wetlands clean and undeveloped. And, that's going to have kind of a domino effect of helping out all these other species, from ducks to frogs to other birds who utilize wetlands, and a variety of different animals, as well as just wetlands are important for people as well. They're important for mitigating floods and all sorts of stuff. So we save the trumpeter swan, we save the wetlands, and everybody is going to be all the happier for it. Also, hunters, and this is a very small percentage, I'm sure, who they should know their targets, and I'm sure most of them do. But I have seen firsthand occasions where swans have been shot during hunting season. And I'll give the people sort of the benefit of the doubt and assume it was mistaken identity and not deliberately shooting at swans. Even tundra swans are also illegal to hunt in Canada and I believe in the United States as well. So really make sure you're sure of what you're hunting. Um, yeah, these are ways that we can make sure that the swan continues to thrive and survive, not just in Alberta, but this is also applicable to Saskatchewan as well as the rest of the continent in general. So that is the end of that. Hopefully, this was enjoyable and of interest, and I will be happy to take any questions now.
First of all, thank you so much for the awesome presentation. There's been quite a few people that have written in already saying well done and how informative it was. So thank you. And of course, we have lots of questions already.
All right.
um, okay, Melody is wondering, through your research, was there ever mention to the very few breeding or nesting pairs in Cypress Hills? This goes back to the 1970s and 80s. She's referring to Adams Lake in Cypress Hills, Saskatchewan, but it's actually tied to Alberta.
I have to admit, I don't know very much about that. Most of the discussion around swan breeding during that time was really kind of focused on the area in and around Elk Island. I have seen range maps that show swan breeding data in the Cypress Hills area. Um, I don't know how that's going right now, but that would be interesting to learn more about. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll have to look into that. That's good information.
Yes. Awesome. Um, the avian flu. Stephen is wondering, has the avian flu outbreak affected trumpeter swans at a population level?
It doesn't really seem to have. The good thing with trumpeter swans is they don't go to bird feeders. And bird feeders were a big um, transmission vector for avian flu because you get a lot of individuals gathered around in one spot. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is you got to clean your bird feeders pretty regularly because, birds are bringing in germs and things like that and, pooping and stuff all over the feeders. And so it's just kind of like a breeding ground for viruses and bacteria and stuff. So, are swans immune from that? I'm sure they're not. Um, but I don't think that they were more to be worried about than anything else when it came to avian flu. Of course, all birds are susceptible to that. But from what I saw, especially during last fall, there was tons of trumpeter swans out there. So I don't think that they were hit harder than anything else. I'll put it that way.
Okay. Um, we have a question about drought. Has drought in Alberta affected their breeding success?
It doesn't seem to have yet, but I'm sure it will be. We are, in recent years seeing, drier periods. This winter was very, very dry. We had a good couple spring snow dumps last month, which a lot of people were complaining about. And then you had sort of the eco warriors being like, no, 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 we need it because the wetlands are going to be bone dry by the
Yeah.
time the birds are coming back. So if things continue that way, um, then yeah, I'm sure trumpeter swans will be as negatively affected as anything else.
Mhm.
And the projections that I've sort of seen for like how climate change and in general, which this drought is just kind of a part of, is going to affect Alberta, is essentially you're going to get like the dry arid grasslands kind of spreading north, and what's now kind of the central parkland ecosystem will be much further north. So maybe swans will be able to adapt in kind of the medium term by um, just sort of breeding more and more northernly focused, but they're gonna run out of space and habitat for that. So that's
Mhm.
something to consider as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been a couple questions about swans in Saskatchewan. I know you had a map up earlier. I don't know if you want to just put that
Here we
back up.
can.
Did you know much about the populations that are passing through this area or breeding here? Yeah, there it is.
Not a whole lot to be perfectly honest with you. Um, I would expect that they're not really breeding all too much in these sort of like open, dry southern grassland areas. Um, More so in the slightly more fertile, like aspen, parkland kind of environments. Um, yeah, that's I don't know if any folks from Saskatchewan on here have seen a lot of trumpeter swans in the past years, but yeah, let me know if you have. It would be interesting to look into their breeding records there.
Yeah, that is good to know. If people do want to report swan sightings, what is the best way to do that? Do you want people to send them to you, or could they send them up on eBird or iNaturalist, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, eBird and iNaturalist would definitely be the best things. While I'm interested in such stuff as kind of a professional hobbyist, I'm not the one sort of doing all of the official reporting on this kind of stuff. But folks who are, with like government conservation agencies and official partnerships of such things, they're looking at things like eBird, iNaturalist more and more these days. So definitely worth reporting on those avenues.
Okay, that's awesome. So eNaturalist, uh, eBird, iNaturalist, great place for people to send up their sightings.
Yeah,
Um,
great.
there's a question from Bill. Do swans have a challenge related to the small populations rebounding? For example, are they too inbred? Do you know anything about that?
Um, that hasn't come up anywhere that I've done any reading on the matter. While there may have been some genetic bottlenecking happening
Mhm.
at the turn of the 19th and 20th century, um, it doesn't seem to have affected them much. I haven't seen any data on like genetic diseases, defects in them, things like that. Um, we were looking at really healthy individuals nowadays. Like the population graph showed, can I just zoom back to that? We're seeing great recruitment of young um, individuals coming back up, like adults coming back up from their wintering grounds, really well fed and healthy. And I doubt we'd be seeing that if they had a lot of genetic diseases and things like that from any kind of inbreeding genetic bottlenecking. So um, I'd say they're probably okay.
Yeah, that's good. um, And then Mike said a couple of thoughts. Swans are very susceptible to lead poisoning, so use of non-toxic small sinkers and similar lead fishing tackle should be avoided. Do you have any comments about that?
It doesn't sound like a bad thing to avoid using that at all. Any kind of stuff like that that's toxic getting into wetlands should be avoided. Um,
Mhm.
while we're on the topic of fishing in places where swans might be, or even if you're not doing it while the swans are there, always a good idea to make sure that you're not leaving behind um, like fishing line, fish hooks, things like that. Um, I we used to work at the Royal Alberta Museum, dissecting birds basically just to turn them into museum specimens and gathering data from that. And like we'd see occasionally birds that had swallowed fish hooks and fishing line. And obviously you can imagine that's not good. That
Mhm.
leads to bird deaths when that happens. So yeah, we definitely recommend don't leave your fish hooks, your fishing line, anything like that. Anything that's small and swallowable. Um, yeah, it's not going to lead to good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I just want to add that Mike said there's a Trumpeter Swan Society on the website that is a good resource for people who are looking to leave more. So I just
Ah,
thought I'd add that in.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um, Elizabeth is asking, given the exponential growth occurring in continental swan populations, why do you think they're not expanding into areas between the population core areas in Alberta?
Well, that is a good question. So let me just return to our map here. So, um, it mostly has to do with habitat suitability. So what we're looking at with like northwestern Alberta up here, and then kind of central region here, you've got a lot of aspen parkland environment, which has a lot of suitable wetlands. In between like the Pincher Creek area and the sort of central area, it's kind of mostly like short grass, prairie, grasslands, that kind of thing. And there are wetlands, of course, in those areas, but they're just it's just kind of too dry an environment for swans to be breeding in big numbers, at least at the moment it is. Um, around the Calgary area, like you'll definitely see them on migration, but kind of between Calgary and the foothills, you've got sort of a narrow strip of the foothills parkland. Nice habitat, but it's very poor in wetlands. So there's not many places for swans to um, like set up for the season. Like you'll see them on the Bow River and things like that, sometimes in big numbers, um, like in early spring and late in the fall. But that's about it. Um, and then obviously the like you'll see some swans breeding in the foothills areas like around like Edson, places like that. They're kind of cut off here by the Swan Hills, um, ironically named. Um, but they'll pass through uh, the foothills areas. There's just not quite as many suitable wetlands in the foothills region, and then in the Rockies, obviously. The lakes aren't suitable for them there either. Not to say you can't see swans in the Rockies. Have seen trumpeter swans near Jasper, but they're just kind of moving through. Um, but then, this big, huge area up in northwestern Alberta and into northeastern British Columbia, full of very suitable wetland habitat. So, good place for them.
Okay. And Kelly Cooley from the Pincher Creek Waterton area is the coordinator for Alice. I think that's Alternative Land Use Services in Pincher Creek. And one of their program goals is to encourage landowners to protect wetland areas and even year round open water lakes from farming and even livestock direct access. Are you aware of any direct funding that they could access to support these efforts for the encouragement and protection of swan habitat in the Pincher Creek Waterton area?
Ooh, nothing off the top of my head. Um, yeah, that aside from I don't know what partnerships or charities they've already worked with, maybe like the ACA, Alberta Conservation Association, could help out with that.
Mhm.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know specifically, but I mean, hey, if you want to get a hold of me later on, maybe we can, brainstorm something. I don't know. Yeah, good question. I hope it works out down there and that you can keep protecting areas like that. That's important in that area, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, okay, sorry, we've got lots of questions here. Um, And there's been a few comments. Cheryl with Nature Alberta says, thanks for the great presentation. As someone who grew up near Swan City, Northwest Alberta, it's great to see them returning to the area. We enjoy seeing nesting pairs on many of the smaller water bodies in the region. So I just thought I'd pass that on.
Excellent.
And yeah, Penny says they have they're in Saskatchewan and they see swans in their area, but only during the spring migration. And they had a trumpeter swan March of 2023 at their dam near Echo Lake for 2 weeks by itself, I guess. And he hung out with the geese. And this is a comment from Dane. He says, FYI, there's a legal regulated hunting season for swans, both tundra and trumpeter swans in Montana.
Hmm.
Do you have any comments about that?
Um, Gee, I don't know. I mean, I don't recommend it personally. Like, not that it's as big a deal today as it was like 100 years ago. Um, if it's important for population control in what was it, Montana? Um, yeah, if there's data to suggest that, yeah, I don't know, but um, I don't know that I don't like the idea of that, to be blunt.
Yeah, yeah, it's quite different.
Yeah,
You
I
know, we
don't.
had a
No, sorry, go ahead.
so we had it was a transboundary workshop. Oh, it was right before COVID, like in 2020, and in Saskatchewan, we're saying, oh, we've got a few dozen, sage grouse, and Alberta's saying, oh, we got less than that. And Montana's like, we've got thousands. It's right across the border there. Even though the line is arbitrary in nature, it seems to make a big difference with population levels and regulations. So hopefully the swans are doing really, really well there. And
Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm sure in Montana, most of the swans are traveling from there to and from Alberta. So their swans are also our swans. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know how many people are allowed to take each year there. Um, I mean, if it's just maybe a small number here and there, maybe it doesn't make a
Yeah.
huge deal. Um, I just kind of think it's a little too early. Um, if this ever happens to not worry about trumpeter swans at all to the degree that we're hunting them. Um, I think if people want to hunt waterfowl, hey, snow geese are doing better than great. We probably have too many of them.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard that they are eating themselves out of their own habitat up there. So yeah, maybe there's other
Yeah,
species that are more appropriate. But yeah, it seems like right now that between drought and climate change and there's other diseases coming up, we just don't know enough about them to say that they're stable and yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, interesting though. Thanks, Dane, for sharing that comment. I see we're running out of time here. Um, I'll just ask one more quick question if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem.
uh, Ray says in the Yukon, there's a common understanding that kayaking around feeding or resting swans is very disturbing. Do you feel that quiet kayaking is an acceptable activity around swans?
That's interesting. I've never heard before that kayaking around I mean, I guess it like depends on how close you're getting. Deliberately approaching swans either by foot or boat, I definitely wouldn't recommend. I know people from like Grand Prairie and such who do a lot of canoeing, kayaking. They go into it very aware of where the swans already are, and they know where not to approach.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not like they're doing it in big groups or anything like that. So um, I would imagine if you're doing it very quietly and respectfully, and you know where to avoid, so that you're not accidentally or especially deliberately disturbing swans. It doesn't sound like it's the end of the world. But I mean, hey, if you want to just say I'm not kayaking during swan breeding season, better to be safe than sorry, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's all the time that we have today, but we've had dozens of people write in to say thank you so much. Um, Catherine says, just to thank you for the presentation. I don't know much about trumpeter swans, and now I know more. Al says, what an incredible presentation. Thank you very much. Um, Kelly says, thanks for the very informative presentation. And it keeps going and going. So thank you so much, Nicholas. We really
Thank
appreciate you
you.
coming out to our speaker series. And this presentation was very thorough and informative. And of course, the pictures are fabulous. And of course, I love the one behind you.
Yeah, that was a nice one. On that note, just real quick, if anybody wants to see more of my stuff or just get in touch, my website is just here below, naturenickphotography.com. Please come visit.
Absolutely. Thanks for pointing that out. So if people want to touch base with you or if they love the swan pictures as much as I do, then that is the place to go.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And to all of our attendees, thanks so much for catching today's webinar. Hopefully, we'll see you on April 30th for one about multi-taxa. Today's webinar is being recorded, so we'll have it up on our YouTube channel probably later today or first thing tomorrow morning. So feel free to rewatch it if you missed something or share it with somebody who would love it as much as you did. And when you leave today's webinar, there'll be a quick 1-minute survey. So if you don't mind filling that out, we really appreciate the feedback from other people. So with that, thank you so much. We hope to see you next time. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody.